A narrative essay is a type of essay that requires you to use your own experience to make a point. So let's talk about how to organize that. Let's start with the obvious. The assignment is to write a narrative essay. So a narrative is a story, and an essay is a type of focused writing in which you develop a topic or an idea. So a narrative essay is a type of writing where you use a story, usually from your own experience, to develop whatever idea or point you want to get across to the reader. So how is it a narrative? Well, a narrative essay is going to have the elements of a story. It's going to have characters and plot. It's going to have setting. And instead of theme, you're going to have a thesis. It's also going to be developed chronologically. So in other types of essays, you have to think about not just what your main point will be, but what's the most logical or effective way to organize those points. You don't have to worry about that with the narrative essay because you're telling a story, you're going to describe the elements of that story, the parts of that story in the order that they happened. So it can be helpful to think about what you learned in elementary school, that all stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And how would that translate into an essay format? So the beginning of the story is going to be whatever exposition or background information the reader needs in order to understand the characters and the events. It's going to set up the action of the story. The middle of the story is going to be where the action happens, usually building up to some kind of crisis or climax. And then the end shows everything working itself out. What comes of all the action that occurred in the middle of the story. So when you're developing that in a narrative essay, what that means is that you might have one or two paragraphs that are telling the beginning of the story, one or two paragraphs that are telling the middle, describing the action of the story, and probably a paragraph telling how all of this ends up and what comes of it. That's a narrative. So how is it an essay? When you are telling a story, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, usually the point of storytelling is just for someone to enjoy the story. There may be a theme or some kind of lesson that the person can take from that story, but it's usually not spelled out for them. In a narrative essay, you're doing something much more explicit, right? You actually want to tell the reader what the point of the story is. You're going to try and do that in a way that isn't a lecture or preaching, but rather making an argument. So you're going to have a thesis that states the point of the story. And you're going to have main points that are supporting throughout the narrative. If you were telling a story just to be telling a story, the focus might be on creating suspense or having a big reveal or a plot twist. Those things can be present in a narrative essay, but they're not the point of the narrative essay. The point of a narrative essay is to make the point that is in the thesis. To help you do that, it's really important that you work on the topic sentences of your paragraphs. The topic sentences are what will keep your narrative essay from just being storytelling. They're going to keep the focus of the essay on your thesis and actually making an argument. One other way that a narrative essay is different from a work of fiction is that it's framed with an introduction and conclusion. So just as with any other essay, your narrative essay is going to have a hook and it's also going to have a conclusion paragraph that's going to either make a call to action or bring the reader full circle back to your hook, however you choose to do that. Let's pull all of this together into some tips for organizing. So first of all, decide the point of the story before writing. And this is why you want to begin your narrative essay by thinking about the thesis. What is the point you're going to make? What is the argument? Use the idea of beginning, middle, and end to break content into paragraphs. It depends on how long an essay is required to be and how much development you need to have as to whether or not one paragraph will suffice for the beginning, one paragraph for the middle, one paragraph for the end. Once you get past 500 words, say you're getting into 750 or 1,000 words, you're probably going to want more than one paragraph for each of these. So think about what are some logical places in the story to start a new paragraph. Where do you need to put topic sentences in order to keep your argument on track for the reader? Make sure every body paragraph is tied to the thesis by a topic sentence. So the topic sentence states the main point of a paragraph, and then the rest of the paragraph develops that. So if I'm writing a narrative of thought in which I'm explaining how I changed my mind about a job I didn't like, one paragraph is probably going to be a description of the job that shows why I didn't like it. I need a topic sentence at the beginning of that paragraph that clearly indicates that this is what the paragraph is about. So something like John's Burger Joint was a crowded, noisy, busy place that made me uncomfortable from my very first day there. Okay. That's kind of a bleak sentence, but it sets up a whole paragraph where I can describe how crowded and busy and noisy it is, and also explain why that type of environment made me uncomfortable or why I found it stressful. Okay. So the topic sentence sets up the point of that paragraph. The rest of the paragraph should develop it with descriptions, examples, anecdotes, quotations, whatever develops that topic sentence. Right. And then don't forget to come back to the argument in the conclusion. And I put, but don't be preachy. There are a couple of ways you can do a conclusion. One of them is to issue a call to action. So to invite the reader to think or do something in response to the narrative that you just told them. So if the story is about why I initially hated John's Burger Joint and then came to like the job, or to at least to appreciate the job more after I had worked there for a while, then maybe my call to action is for the reader to either think differently about a job they don't like, or perhaps to approach their job differently. So something like, while not every job can be enjoyable, every worker can find something to learn from that job that will add value to their resume. Okay. Now, notice I avoided the word you there. I kept it in the third person, every worker. So this is something anyone can do. And by saying it that way, you haven't preached at the audience, you haven't pointed a finger at them, you simply invited them in. Can they include themselves in every worker? Yes, they can. You've invited them to approach their job the same way that you learn to approach yours. The other way you can conclude, and by coming back to your argument, is to come full circle back to however you began the essay. So you're going to practice some different intro strategies for essays to help get you started. Anything that's an intro strategy can also be a conclusion strategy. You can end with a quote. You can end with a rhetorical question that invites the reader to think about what comes next. You can end with a description. It may be most helpful if you end the same way you started. Bring the reader back to whatever hook you used in your intro. So if you opened with a rhetorical question, why is it that some work environments are more stressful than others? Well, now that you've told the story and you've learned to think about your own work environment differently, how would you answer that question? Right? You might say some work environments are more stressful than others because they don't match the personality types of workers. Maybe an introvert isn't going to feel very comfortable in a crowded, bustling restaurant, but that introvert can see that crowded, bustling restaurant as an opportunity to develop different types of strategies for dealing with people. Okay, so you've come back to your rhetorical question and offered an answer. If you open with a description of how tense and busy and stressful the environment is, maybe you can close with a description of you successfully navigating that environment with comfort and confidence because you've acquired some new skills from working there. Right. So, what's the goal here? Well, the goal here is for you to learn how to tell a story in a way that helps you make a point. And this is an essential life skill for parenting, first of all, but also it's an important skill for communicating in work environments as well. You can often create understanding, help people relate to you, understand where you're coming from by telling a story that illustrates why you have the approach that you do. So see this as an opportunity to practice that skill.